Welcome. My name is Richard Von Glahn. I'm the Policy Director of Missouri Jobs with Justice. So I want to welcome everyone to what I believe is the fourth installment of the Missouri Jobs with Justice Voter Action response to the COVID-19 webinar series. We've been doing these to try to help keep everyone informed about the struggles that we have going on, both in the legislative session and with different workplace fights and all of that, as well as to maintain a sense of community in this time. Our last webinar featured an online rally with hundreds of participants, which was really a lot of fun and a new thing that we did. But today, we're going to leave the fun behind as we discuss what's at stake in the final week of the Missouri legislative session, and frankly, what we all need to do about it. A few notes and tips about the webinar and using Zoom before we get started. With over 60 people on the call so far, we're going to have everyone on mute, and you're only going to see the speakers by video. If you are on a computer, please use the Q&A button at the bottom to ask questions about the presentation, so we make sure we can find those. We will answer some as we go along, and we'll open it up at the end for more questions. Please use the chat function to make comments or flag any issues, as well as just introduce yourself. I know a lot of people are doing that so far. That's wonderful to see, so we can know who's on the call and your reactions to some of what you hear today. We're going to have several staff members in the chat who are always going to be happy to connect and answer any questions. During this presentation, you're going to see several links, and we will share those out immediately after the webinar this morning. So don't feel that you need to write everything down or copy everything as we go. We'll send all the information back out. We will also provide the contact information for all of our local organizers at the end of the call if you have any follow-up questions or concerns. Missouri Jobs with Justice Voter Action is a coalition of labor, community, faith, and student groups, as well as individual activists who are fighting for an economy and democracy that works for all of us. We are also part of a coalition called the Missouri Organizing and Voter Engagement Collaborative. And I'm going to take a moment to introduce part of the mission statement of that organization before we get started today. We are a collaboration of grassroots organizations that believe in the innate dignity, worth, and power of all people. We work to support the leadership of historically oppressed people and oppose dehumanizing narratives of white supremacy and domination. We work together on issues of education, economics, criminal justice, health, labor, and political engagement. We are dedicated to creating a new narrative of mutual thriving and modeling the just world that we want to create both within and between all of our organizations. And I know there are a lot of representatives of organizations on the call here today. Today, we are excited and fortunate to hear from three leaders of the Jobs with Justice Coalition. Clark Brown from Service Employees International Union Local 1, Michaela Allen from Action St. Louis, and Alice Barber, an activist and member of our Springfield Organizing Committee. Together, we will discuss the misplaced priorities of our legislature and what is at stake in this final week of the legislative session. The Missouri legislature officially adjourns this Friday at 6 p.m. This means any bill that has not passed both chambers, both the Missouri House and the Senate, by 6 o'clock this Friday are defeated, and they'll have to restart the entire legislative process again next year. The final week of session is a very hectic time for amending bills and politicians trying to sneak things in. We are very fortunate to have experts like Clark, who serves as a lobbyist up in Jefferson City, as part of our movement and on today's call to help us shed light on some of these sneak attacks. But it's also critically important that we don't just learn about the attacks this week, but that we take action. Sunshine is a powerful disinfectant for these attacks. And so we're going to be discussing ways throughout this webinar that you can take action throughout the call. And so now I want to turn it over to Clark Brown to discuss some of the attacks that are coming up on minimum wage and unemployment.
Hey, good morning, Richard, and all of our JWJ friends. Honored to be on your webinar this morning, and Richard probably over-exaggerates, of the expertise or professional side of things. I mean, you just convince people by long-time seniority doing the work and so forth that you seem to know everything, and it's not always true. So I'll do my best to be accurate and some thoughts to share with you and to give you maybe a better picture of the reality of what they're trying to do here with minimum wage this year in the General Assembly. Want to tell the group to think about the timelines here. We are genuinely in this last week, and most of the time, if they follow rules in the General Assembly, it takes a legislative day each time an action happens with legislation, but sometimes there is some shortcuts taken when they suspend rules and do some things. So as I kind of look at what I wanted to message about this, I got to be real careful to say, well, you know, I informed or told folks it would take 3 days of legislative waits for votes, but that doesn't always happen sometimes with bending the rules or suspending the rules as they do so many times. So let's go ahead and say this is not a first-time effort for what lawmakers in Missouri want to look to do with modification. Generally, they love to do total repeal, but modification of Missouri's minimum wage. We had this exact same fight that we're going to set and explain today with you last year in the General Assembly. All this because of us passing a new 2018 modification to minimum wage. And as you know, our state has to take that avenue. We just have to take things in the hands of the voters because our General Assembly doesn't want to support our progressive and worthy ideas. So we were proud to have done work on that and passed that in 18. We now have this stair-step minimum wage that will move to 2023, getting us to $12 an hour. We saw last year, because of the reaction to this, I think that General Assembly lawmakers of special interest realize that total repeal isn't something genuinely capable on their part. You know, frankly, we have overwhelming percentage rates that voters approve adjusting minimum wage state by state. We're not the only state, certainly. But so we saw a new twist in this last year. Since 08, not confusing things, that was the original minimum wage we did, and it needed some modification. But we've seen returning attacks on Missouri's minimum wage. Probably the most popular thing outside of, like we say, they would love to have total repeal, but they have spent some multiple years prior in trying to exempt our tipped workers. And I think that they've seen, due to the good work of this organization, we've had some tremendous great lobby days. We've had some tremendous participation from, actually impacted workers coming to the General Assembly, doing testimony in those hearings, whether they be House or Senate. I think real clearly that we've seen a pullback on that avenue, led by Restaurant Association. I think the national special interest is behind that, as well as Missouri's. But I think after them seeing the expert work that JWJ has done around protecting the minimum wage, they've tried to look at what other twist could we do to look at doing exemptions. So last year, we faced the very similar bill that we're facing this year, and that was a look at doing exemption of private and including religious schools. I think that that's done some fast work for us to do some education to decision makers, lawmakers, that, frankly, the private religious schools as a choice thing. Why would we think that that exemption is any different than a public school? Are they special? What's the reason for this? I think too, some of the work, and Richard would concur, we don't see any private school leaders, you know, charter schools and so forth, or religious preference of Catholic school education, those kind of things. We don't even see these folks advocating for this. So frankly, I think there's a little bit known in their hearts that this is not something that they have the public or those organization facilities needing this exemption. It's just a way to find the loophole to start an exemption process. So saying, giving that thought with that idea, I think everybody knows what this is. It's a foot in the door, frankly, is how we would like to classify this. Different from last year. We did the same thing last year. The bill was numbered under House Bill 763, same thing, Missouri private and religious schools. That bill ran out of the prioritization, the will of the Senate last year to make that a top priority. We went all through the process with that, defended that or objected to that in hearings, clear from the House side, to only not be able to control that, of course, coming out of the House. It had a vote of 94 to 53 last year. This year, same thing. We've got pretty much the same supporting advocacy on that side, a little more absentees on the objecting side. So it landed at 93-46 this year. Most of us know if we have progressive or legislation we're supporting or opposing, it's pretty hard when you have 3/4 margins in the House to shut things down. We're beyond counts of really getting numbers built up to even do a veto if stuff does get passed, which frankly is a situation if this was to have more attention and get through the process. We certainly wouldn't have veto numbers to override, even if we could get a governor to consider veto. So we're real long shots on this stuff. This year, what we want to say is different about this. This is not unusual. The bill itself is not as it was presented in the House. The Senate has taken this bill up. It has now been created into kind of what we call a mini omnibus bill. But I wouldn't really say it's a genuine omnibus. Usually they have a dozen plus other pieces or policies stacked in those genuine omnibus labeled bills. This one, I believe, has had a few things rolled into it to just kind of create some interest or create some urgency for this isn't just about minimum wage. It has some other pieces of policy in it that quite possibly the Senate would want to look at and take up. Talking about the timelines of that, this bill now sits on the Senate informal calendar. It, has cleared the Senate's committee, of course, changed from what the House delivered to them. But we are looking at 2 votes in the Senate to happen and 1 vote back over in the House because they changed the legislation from what the House sent. That gives us 3 legislative days in the process, and this piece of legislation, this law could be real. Let's talk about, and like I said, it could be Thursday and something happen and them suspend a rule and somehow get a final vote back in the House concurring this to happen. They just have some abilities of suspending rules on these legislative days. It's not ethical, but they do it. So that's the thoughts. 3 days of votes. Now what's going to happen if this bill does get through? Outside of the piece that we certainly want to defend, no exemptions period, slippery slope, everything we spoke to them and told them, it's just not right. We don't even see where the advocacy side is on this legislation or the need of it. We now have probably a hot topic for Missouri. As you know, voters approved it. Now we have language put in there about marijuana, medical marijuana and employment process, policies. So now this legislation now has language specifically that employers may create policies that refuse the use of of medical prescribed cannabis on the job, as well as they may now clearly put in policy manuals that they may choose or elect to be a random testing employer for the detection of medical marijuana for that reason of they have a policy it's prohibited for on-the-job use. Then it also has some changes to workers' compensation. Richard and some of the staff of JWJ knows our fights with the General Assembly about their protection and favor to first responders, and that's the category. EMS, law enforcement, all this tends to fare pretty well. So they've got a piece of workers' comp about first responders in here. And this has to do with, there is a one-sentence language now in statutes that says in the line of duty for first responders, they may have some eligible benefit from workers' comp coverage for post-traumatic stress syndrome. Frankly, they've stretched this out. This is 8 new sentences of worker comp language. It gets a little bit more defined that it doesn't have to actually be PTSD. It could be, frankly, just a stress disorder. But frankly, they've liberalized the opportunity for legislators to, first responders to make and duly with merit receive worker compensation on the job treatment and healthcare for mental stress situations. Then we come into a new piece that Richard and the good work of JWJ, we've done some connective work with the national organization of NELP, National Employment and Law Policy Center. At first looks, Richard and I discussed this as well as some other partners. It looked as if they were putting something in there to tempt legislators to say, well, this is a good thing, but they wanted to add some language, and it's in there, of course, saying that severance and termination payouts in this time of dealing with layoffs and cutbacks to employment in our country now isn't going to include that your severance and termination pay would calculate into your amount of weekly benefit of unemployment in the case of being laid off or terminated. I think at first look, we were thinking, okay, so if you got a $2,000 payout, that helped you meet, get a better threshold than just like a server's base wage that would have been recorded, and that they would now be able to calculate and get that full $320 a week. But I think after interpretations from the professionals, they see these laws happen all over the country. And like I said, I'm not the professional, so but NELP has helped us underline and understand that this maybe language is meant or interpreted to be, if you get a lump sum payment or a severance payout, that frankly, that will calculate against that annual amortized amount of weekly benefits. So in Missouri, we're maxed at $320. Frankly, if you had the $2,000 or $5,000 payout, sometimes employers do this with the thought of, we'll give you 12 weeks payout, 3 months of pay. This frankly boosts your, they want to take and prorate this into 12 months down to 4 weeks in each month, and then end up, that skims off the top before you're out of your $320 a weekly draw. That is a no-no to us. I think that's a real surprising twist to this. Because frankly, I mean, the trend across our country and every state is supporting massive unemployment benefits, extensions to the weeks we can draw this. This one's almost a head scratcher to us to say, now here we are, this is the conservatives that we find in Missouri. We're at 20 weeks and the national average is 23 weeks on unemployment draw anyway. And now they want to say, they want to calculate all this to reduce your weekly benefit for Missouri unemployment needs. I think that's a little bit of surprise for us in the thoughts of just what this language means in here. But I think too, for the ultra conservatives, they know this is going to save money on the employer's tax calculation of what they pay into unemployment. And they've always been, as you know, in the pockets of corporate America and business. And I think that this is one crazy piece that they're going to step out with and say, this is a good thing to look at too, so that we protect employers and keep their unemployment taxation down. So a hard one for us to swallow, but this bill now has three other additional pieces tacked into it that I know the first couple I talked about are very thoughts of necessary. Need the cannabis laws in Missouri or employment laws. We need stronger stress and mental health worker comp rights for first responders. We need to, not put the demands on these private and religious schools. They struggle so much to, have paid tuition anyway from their students. And so they need to keep operating costs down to keep tuition low. I mean, frankly, those folks need to think about, you're choosing not to use a public school. It's going to cost you. And then, of course, this slam of saying we're going to calculate everything you get income-wise through the system, because I don't want to over-exaggerate it, but they think it's pretty flush right now with the feds giving you a $600 a week boost and all this. So, why not keep our Missouri employers out of the loop of getting hurt with unemployment taxation? And, they're being great folks giving you $1,000 when they shove you out the door. So now we're going to calculate that in your reduction of your weekly benefit. So I think that pretty much takes us to every piece within the legislation, thoughts about where we face possible passage of this for the timelines and the procedural requirements for it to happen through the Senate on this point and stage of this. I think that the Senate gives us one valuable tool, which JWJ of course does, makes a call upon you. Frankly, the Senate has opportunities to filibuster and debate and stand on this kind of issue. They can go all night long on these things. They can, be over or strong-armed, arm wrestled, and then overrun with a forced previous question and roll call vote. They don't rarely like to do that very much. It becomes very explosive to do that in the Senate chambers and creates a division of the two parties. Whereas right now they try to cooperatively work on agreements and bargains, compromises that is. So let's just hope that they have some other things in the General Assembly stacked up they think are important to get done before this last day, to where they don't grab up something like this minimum wage and start twisting the arms and forcing previous question calls. We'll have a nightmare of fireworks if that happens. Frankly, we've seen some years, it's kind of rare, but they break that PQ out and we end up with the Senate in just complete abandonment, don't want to take anything up. We've seen them adjourn early because of this kind of stuff. So I think that's the climate settings. I'll be honest, there isn't a lobbyist one that knows the bottom line of exact agendas up there. There are plenty of other things stacked up, more critical care and necessary type policy they should be doing. Let's hope they have some focus on that. I know as of now, and I close this thought, there is some nonpartisan problems and disgust with the thoughts of taking up a budget policy outside of budget and what's necessarily needed for Missouri to do their part in controlling coronavirus COVID pandemic we're dealing with this year. So let's see what happens with that. This is the final week. We're going to know a little more. They're not in session yet, but they will be running strong by this afternoon, and all week long they're going to spend longer hours, at least 8 and 10-hour days probably in debate in there. JWJ is an awful good communication tool. I'm sure they'll put out notices about things and calls for action as we move forward through this. Unrehearsed, Richard,
Yep.
do this Friday, threw together some thought to try to give you the beef of the story, the meat and potatoes best I could. I appreciate you asking us on here.
Yep. Thank you, Clark. We appreciate you always keeping an eye on these things and helping decipher exactly what's getting proposed here. So folks will see on their screen, what part of our strategy against this and making sure that the Senate doesn't prioritize this bill, and frankly that this is a bill that the governor recognizes that he shouldn't want coming to his desk in a year in which he would, there's a proposal both to make it harder for workers to access unemployment benefits and to go back on the demands of 62% of voters that voted on Prop B. You will see a couple, sample tweets that people can have. And again, these will come out after the call to everyone who RSVP'd, along with this fancy GIF that you can see over here, which is just an animated thing that you can put up on Twitter or on Facebook. It helps pull people's attention to exactly what these attacks are. Like I said, I think sometimes sunshine is the strongest disinfectant onto these issues, and so we hope everyone can help us and spread the word about these things. I am going to turn it over next to Alice Barber to give us a quick update on something that we've talked about time and time again on this call, and some of the great work that she's helping lead in on defending Clean Missouri Amendment 1. Alice, you should be unmuted.
Okay. All right, so Clean Missouri is still being opposed. We passed it back in 2018. They tried to overturn it last year. That didn't work, but they're trying again this year. And this year's attempt to overturn Clean Missouri is SJR 38. The people who are advocating for this are saying, oh, people didn't know what they voted on. We know better than they do. We were just going to go back to how it was before. And that's not true. It's actually going to make things worse. So number one, it is just undermining the will of the people. More than 60% of people in Missouri voted for Clean Missouri. It's what we want. We knew what we voted for exactly, and they're still trying to get rid of it. But then it's actually going to give political parties more say over redistricting than there was even before we passed Clean Missouri, which means it's also going to make protections for minority communities, for Black and Brown communities, way worse than they already were. So we're going from trying to get away from gerrymandering to even worse gerrymandering. But we are working to stop it from happening. Here in Springfield, we've actually had a lot of luck with our legislators. Senator Lincoln Hough has already voted against SJR 38 in the Senate. And my representative, Steve Helms, voted against last year's attempt to overturn Clean. And every time I call him, he says that he's committed to vote no on SJR 38 too. And these guys are Republicans. These guys are not with us at all ideologically, but they got enough phone calls that we pressured them into going along with it anyway. They know that their constituents do not want them overturning Clean Missouri, so they're not going to try to overturn Clean Missouri, those individual legislators. So what we're trying to do now is get more people to do what Hough and Helms are doing, to say, I will go against my party here and actually represent my constituents for once. And really the way to do that is just to get lots of phone calls into their office, because a lot of these guys don't get very many phone calls most of the time. They're not used to having their phones ringing off the hook with people calling in saying, why are you trying to overturn what we voted for? So we've been doing some phone banks to get voters calling in and putting pressure specifically on representatives who are in districts where people overwhelmingly supported Clean, but maybe don't support that representative so much. Although the one we've been calling recently, it's Jonathan Patterson in Lee's Summit. He's fairly popular there, but people there voted for Clean at even higher rates than in the whole state. And all the people that I have talked to on the phone, either they remember Clean, and once I tell them that people in the legislature are trying to overturn it, they're very unhappy about it. Or a lot of people don't really remember voting on Clean, but once I explain what it was, and I tell them how many people in the state voted for this and what the legislature's trying to do, they're all pretty happy to be patched through, call Representative Patterson and tell him stop, don't overturn this. So it seems to be just a matter of getting enough people mobilized to make those calls that we can actually flip the position of the people who have the power to stop this. We can put the brakes on this year, just like we did last year. So what you can do to take action on this, first thing you can do is email. We've got some links here showing how you can send the email, what numbers you can call. Really, it's contact your legislator and then get other people to contact theirs. Everything on this slide, you've got your talking points. The one that's worked best for me is just, this is the will of the people. They're trying to overturn it. That's not cool. Tell them to stop doing that. Even people who have never heard the word gerrymandering before, who really don't get why clean was necessary or what's wrong with overturning it, just saying that people wanted this and they want to get rid of it is enough to put on a lot of pressure. I do not have a list of the districts and the percentage of people who supported it, but I think some of the folks who've been running the phone banks.
Yep.
Sure.
We are doing targeting based on where clean did 62% statewide. There are 22 districts that Clean Missouri passed with a higher vote total than the Republican that got elected in that district was voted with. So it really shows how bipartisan the support of Clean was, and we are starting by targeting those representatives. So thank you, Alice, and really appreciate your great leadership and work, your story of your own state representative, Representative Helms, who continues to assert that he will vote against this because he knows that his constituents are expecting him to, is really, really helpful, and we greatly appreciate your work there. One of the ways that Alice has been able to do that, connecting with other voters, has been through phone banks that Jobs with Justice has been doing. Our next is tomorrow, Tuesday at 5:30. If you're not already signed up to join Alice and support that effort, please contact your local organizer, and we make sure that you get plugged in with the technology and the tools that you need to connect voters to their legislators and help keep this bill at bay here in these final couple days. Finally, I'm going to turn it over to Michaela Allen, who's an organizer with Action St. Louis, to give us some updates on voting rights and things in this final week. Michaela?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so I think, thanks to Allison Clark, we have a pretty clear picture by this point on just how little regard the legislature has for Missourians. Focusing on attacking two mandates that were fully supported and overwhelmingly passed by Missouri voters during a global pandemic makes no sense, and it reads as the legislature trying to pull one over on us voters while we can't safely go to the Capitol and advocate for ourselves. It's pretty clear the Missouri legislature doesn't want to hear from us or uphold the will of the people of this state. So as it was mentioned before, there are several omnibus bills in the legislature right now. Two of those bills are Senate Bill 552 and Senate Bill 587. They pertain to elections, and both of these bills seek to silence the people of Missouri. So they start this by attacking the initiative petition process. Both bills include language written by the Secretary of State that add in unnecessary and expensive filing fees on initiative petitions, while actually amplifying the Secretary of State's power over this entire process instead of the people. Secondly, the bill attempts to add in a photo ID requirement. It's currently struck down, but even just the attempt to add in the photo ID requirement illustrates a clear attack on our voting rights. Photo ID requirements disproportionately affect Black, Brown, and older Missourians who have less access to many documents, transportation time, all those other factors that are required to get an ID. And so photo ID laws usually end up being so confusing to navigate that people don't vote altogether. And that's the true intention behind this piece of the bill, is simply to keep people from voting. So we have to continue battling these bills in order to protect our democracy. The initiative petition process is one of our strongest tools in creating real structural change in Missouri. And through this process, the power lies directly in the hands of the people and gives us a chance to directly participate in shaping our democracy. So in order to stop these bills, we need to, like it was said before, we need to call our senators and tell them what's up. So you can look up who your senator is and their phone number on senate.mo.gov. And, just tell them your name, tell them where you're from, and that it's important to you that they protect democracy in Missouri, and to vote no on Senate Bill 552 and 587. So the last thing I want to touch on is what these bills don't do. They do not ensure that we can vote safely during a global health pandemic. Despite a fast approaching June election in St. Louis County and numerous requests of election authorities to increase access to the ballots, these bills provide a very narrow option for absentee voting that essentially just adds in another reason that you can check to vote absentee that's COVID-19 related, but it's contingent upon the governor declaring a state of emergency. So if the governor decides to revoke the state of emergency, our opportunity to vote safely is revoked as well. So our path forward on this consists of two parts. First, we should send positive energy to the ACLU, who is in court tomorrow arguing with the Secretary of State that Missouri's current absentee voting laws should allow all Missouri voters to be able to vote from home safely during the pandemic. And if we win, if we're successful in this, then we hope to have the clarity to allow voters to vote by mail without the burden of needing a notary. And so while that'll be a win for 2020, and we recognize the need for immediate mitigation on this issue, we're committed to moving no excuse, no notary absentee voting forward beyond 2020. So Action St. Louis and Missouri Jobs with Justice are partnered together on a campaign to move Missouri to join the other 34 states that have no excuse absentee voting. I'm currently helping lead a program to help connect voters on this issue. And so another way that you can get involved, you can help educate other Missouri voters around absentee voting. If you have a story about absentee voting and why it's worked for you and you're willing to share it, or if you feel strongly about no excuse absentee voting, you can reach out to me via email, which is on the slide, and we can connect about that. And so lastly, I just want to make sure that everybody has signed our petition for the Vote 2022 campaign, and that you share it across your social media platforms. It's absolutely going to take all of us to fight for a democracy that works for everyone in our state. So I encourage you to sign our petition, join the campaign, and be on the lookout for more ways to engage. And I don't know if there were any questions. Don't think I see any. So I will kick it back over to you, Richard.
Great. Thank you, Michaela. Appreciate that update, and needing to track all of these different bills. I think one of these election bills has grown to being almost over 70 pages of law. And so it takes a lot to be able to decipher this and go through it. And we've been really leaning on the leadership of the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition and St. Louis Worker Rights Board member Denise Lieberman, who helps lead that and has provided previous updates on these calls. So there's a lot moving in Jefferson City this week, and it's probably no surprise to anybody that most of them are really bad. I saw one question in the chat about one other bill that has began to move, then felt like it was dead and is then being resurrected. It is a bill on Medicaid work requirements. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the call, but Ruth Erzman, at the end of this, we will open it up to you, Ruth, to be able to provide an update on that. So anyone who's interested on that issue, let us get you promoted to a panelist here, Ruth, and you can give us an update on that here right at the end. So again, thank you to everyone for joining. We know this week is going to be hectic, and so we really appreciate the opportunity to learn from Clark, Alice, and Michaela, both about what these bills do, and then most importantly, what we need to do to help stop them. Without our action and input, these terrible bills could become law and further harm working people in our state. As soon as the recording of this webinar is complete, probably takes about an hour, you will get a copy of it along with the social media toolkit designed to allow you to take action. It's going to include these links to these petitions, as well as sample tweets and some of the graphics that you saw that you can share out. We designed it to be as user-friendly as possible for whatever social media platform you might use, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. But if you have questions, feel free to reach out to us and we can try to offer some technical assistance. We are also going to be hosting phone banks both tomorrow and on Thursday to help defend clean. Please let us know if you want to help. Again, local organizers' contact information will be shared, and appreciate everyone that has been doing that. Who knows, maybe the 3 or 4 calls that you transfer into a legislator help make all the difference in the world on stopping one of these terrible bills. So please do all you can this week. Finally, as our state begins to relax social distancing guidelines, we really want to hope everyone can stay safe and healthy. There's an earlier reference to it in the chat, but we want to specifically lift up our thoughts and prayers for Representative Judy Morgan, who is one of our closest allies in the Missouri legislature and whose husband, Gene, is in the hospital. So please do lift up your thoughts and your prayers for Representative Morgan. We're going to continue with our bi-weekly webinars for at least one more time. We will do one at the end of May with a sort of recap of what happened and what didn't happen in the legislature and steps forward out of that. So be sure to look for that for late May. Thank you again to everyone for joining and for the action that you will take in these final few days. And I'm hoping we've been able to figure out how to promote Ruth Erzman, Worker Rights Board co-chair and leader with Vision for Children at Risk, to give us an update on one final bill that we thought was dead but is maybe being resurrected. Ruth, you should be unmuted.
Hey, thanks, Richard. If there's somebody from Missouri Healthcare for All or the Missouri Budget Project on the call, I would be happy to let them speak for this, because I'm really sharing action alerts that were passed on to me. But anyway, HJR 106 would establish work requirements for some of the folks that are insured by Medicaid. This seems like a particularly bad idea, particularly now during a pandemic when many people are not able to find work. I really think it's an effort to mitigate the positive impact of if we approve Medicaid expansion. We know that's coming on the ballot, or we expect it to be. I think this is a way of trying to neutralize the positive effect of that. It will cost the state money. It will the fiscal note that I've seen is completely inadequate and doesn't reflect the actual costs. And to do this during a pandemic when we've just seen how important adequate health insurance is for folks is just unconscionable. So the budget committee's considering that bill this morning, is my understanding, even now as we speak. So if immediate action would be to contact those members and tell them to vote no on HJR 106. Thanks, Richard.
All right. Thank you, Ruth. And again, this is HJR 106. HJR 106. So that brings us to a conclusion. If anyone has any other questions, you can put them in the Q&A function in the chat, and we will try to address them. So go ahead and do that. Or if there are none, we really appreciate everyone's time and dedication. And like we said, we'll have a busy week. Please follow us on Facebook, Missouri Jobs with Justice, on Twitter at MOJWJ, and on Instagram, Missouri JWJ. I see a question from Ed Finkelstein. Do we have a tentative count on Clean Missouri? I imagine that's about a count from the legislature. You know, we are working hard, and as Alice mentioned, you know, there are some Republicans that are that have been firmly committed to voting no on SJR 38. We also know there's a tremendous amount of pressure being put on them, not by any in-state individuals. There was in fact no one who testified in support of that proposal at the last hearing, but there's a lot of national pressure coming down. And so in this last week, it is particularly hard on figuring out exactly where these bills are. But we do know from conversations that we've even been having over the weekend that a lot of legislators are not familiar with what exactly is in this bill. And as we help expose that, they are particularly uncomfortable with that and knowing that it would be going against the explicit wishes of 1.4 million Missourians. So we need to continue to do that work this week and highlight and give them enough concern and pause that they do not prioritize that bill this final week. Any other final questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you everyone for your time, and have a wonderful week.